What is up, Planeswalkers? Theoric6 back with some more Magic the Gathering. Don't forget to head on over to flipsidegaming.com and use promo code 6 for 10% off on orders over $10. It's a good deal and helps support the channel. Now today, we're going to be talking about spoilers. Now specifically, the Ravnica Allegiance spoilers. I asked, and you guys wanted to see that. That said, I don't do editing. Really, it's just not something I do, so we're gonna have it like this style of thing where I just kind of click through the different tabs I already have open, and we're gonna talk about cards. Yeah, it's fine. I'm gonna try to keep this video relatively short, and just talk about the card's application in mostly constructed. I might mention limited here and there, but for the most part, this is going to be me talking about standard and modern, maybe a little bit of legacy talk, but yeah, just a small, slight discussion that I hope you guys enjoy. Now, we're going to start off with the Buy a Box promo. This is, I believe, confirmed as the Buy a Box promo, and this is very much more akin to Great Worm, to Colossus Great Worm, or whatever the heck it is, the Convoke one, than it is to Nexus of Fate. As you can see with this card, it likely doesn't have nearly the same power level as something like Nexus of Fate. You're likely not going to see this card be played in Standard, is my guess. It very well could be something that you have like a Mimi deck, like I did with Thud for Great Worm, but I don't see this card being very great, because on turn 6 when you cast it, it's just a 3/3. If it had them discard when it entered and when it attacked, that would be helpful. But the fact that this just dies to Lightning Strike and Lava Coil, which are both very, very common forms of removal in this format, makes me think that this card is just not good enough, unfortunately. It is cool that whenever a card is put into a graveyard from anywhere, you do get a counter on it, and that does technically hurt some things like the self-milled, Is It Drake's deck, as well as the Golgari midrange decks, but I just don't think that that benefit is enough considering the amount of removal that both of those decks play. Next up, we'll look at Gate Colossus. The reason I wanted to, actually I'm going to do the promo version, because the promo version looks really awesome. And this was next up because it's not aligned with any of the guilds, so I was like, might as well do this next. Gate Colossus is a cool card. It's really awesome that they're supporting gates still. This hopefully means that there's going to be enough gate stuff for me to make like a really fun gate control deck, or not control deck, well, probably control, a gate deck in Arena coming up after the release. But otherwise it's not, an insanely powerful card. It doesn't have trample. It does have a pseudo evasion with this gate creature, or Colossus can't be blocked by creatures with power 2 or less. That is nice, and the fact that you're able to keep getting it back whenever new gates enter is really nice. The problem with that is that it goes on top of your library and instead of in your hand, and that really does slow down the power level of this card. It really does hinder it, because of the fact that not only do you have to get a gate and then play that gate, but then you have to wait an entire turn cycle to get Gate Colossus back. Now, that said, you're probably going to be able to cast this for essentially free in those scenarios. However, the fact that it takes too long is really disappointing. If it like put it into your hand, but then like you had to ignore the cost reduction, that I think would have been reasonable, because then you still do need to play gates and then you have to pay full price for it. I think that's fine, especially considering this doesn't have true evasion. But unfortunately, as it is now, I think it's just going to be a little bit too slow and too gimmicky to work in a non-fun dedicated gate deck. Next up, we're going to start looking at the Azureus Guild, and here we see their mechanic. It's called Addendum. Essentially, Addendum is going to be mostly on instants, but they said that the way they phrased it, it seems like it's going to be on other things as well. But it's going to mostly be on instants that gives you a benefit when you cast it during your turn. Now, this is very important to realize. You aren't losing out on an effect if you cast it as an instant. You need to always evaluate these cards as an instant with a bonus effect if you choose to play it on your turn. Some people might see this as, oh, well, they're just locking a card or like an effect behind playing it suboptimally. That's not necessarily the case. Not only that, but I really do appreciate the mechanics behind this card, the decision-making potential. Well, not with this card specifically, but with the Addendum mechanic, do you decide to play the card during your turn to get the extra benefit, tapping down in a manner that, in a control deck, you usually want to be doing things on your opponent's turn, tapping down to get that additional effect? Or do you hold up your counters and instead of wasting your mana if they don't play anything, do you then play in emergency powers? So I really like the idea of Addendum. It's, you know, I think it fits Azureus really well. I think it's a really cool addition to their suite of mechanics, Forecast and Detain. I still think Detain's probably going to be my favorite, but I like the idea of the Azureus being so, like, inflexible that they're like, yeah, we're just going to do it on our turn, and because it's better and stuff. I think it's really cool. Additionally, you should notice that this is Dovin Bond. The way we know that is he has too many fingers. So he has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 fingers, and then his thumb is behind here. So this is Dovin Bond because the Vidalcan of Ravnica don't have the Kaladesh Vidalcan hands. And also these are Bolas' horns, which is really, really cool. So he's like, he's what, like, this is Darth Vader, and this is Darth Sidious. They're communicating via hollow. As for the card, do I think it's good? I like the fact that it doesn't help to fairy decks too much. I think that's cool. That Addendum is, like, helps you play different styles of blue-white control. So hopefully that's going to be nice. But what I see being cool about emergency powers is the fact that you get this effect after you do this. So you're going to draw cards, and then you can put a permanent with converted mana cost 7 or more, or 7 or less on the battlefield. There's a really cool card in Standard right now called Pelakka Worm. So I could see this being in, like, a Bant ramp deck that ramps into things like Pelakka Worm, and of course when you're playing ramp, sometimes you just run out of cards in hand. That's, like, one of the biggest problems. But Emergency Powers kind of negates that whole issue, and you're going to have plenty of mana to use. I'm really interested in seeing whether or not you can make an interesting Bant ramp, or maybe even 4-color, add red for a couple Star of Extinctions, because that card's hilarious, and then just do cool Emergency Powers things. I think that's a really interesting potential. Following up, we have Sphinx's Insight. I love, love, love this card, and it's a common, so it is Pauper legal, which is always nice to have new cool things in Pauper. So this, you know, draw 2 cards. If you cast a spell during your main phase, you get to gain 2 life. If you're in a situation where you are forced essentially to, you know, draw cards in your main phase to look for an answer, then you gain 2 extra life, which is nice. If you have to, you can use this to gain 2 life if you know you're going to be doing that anyway, drawing cards, I mean. So I'm very excited about this card in general. However, I think that Chemist's Insight is probably just better because it gives you 1 more card overall and digs you 2 more total cards overall. So I do think, unfortunately, that this is outshined even in Azureus base decks, just because of the fact that gaining just 2 life I don't think is a proper trade-off against the possibility of gaining more card advantage. Also, I'll point this to the flavor text. Grand Arbiter. I assume that Isperia at some point made Dovin Bond the Grand Arbiter of the Sova branch. I should know this. Daru would be mad at me for not noticing, not remembering this. But so Isperia knows, and I think that's why she dies. Anyway, moving on to the another legendary creature. We have Lavinia, Azureus Renegade. She's interesting. I talked at length about this card with some friends and the people on Discord, and I think unfortunately she's just not good enough to see play in Modern, but she's close. So first, I'll talk about the fact that she is like a hate bear. She makes your opponents like have a more difficult time doing things, and she is a human. So theoretically, she could see play in humans, specifically against something like Tron, because you know, it's going to be more difficult for them to cast like the Planeswalkers and their non-creature artifacts, because usually they're going to have fewer lands than the mana cost of their spells. But they still do have Worm Coils. They still do have Thragtusks, right? So this saying non-creatures really does affect the playability of this card. For what it's worth, this does also hurt Cascade spells, but Living End right now isn't too big of a deal. And I guess this does kind of hurt some of the other spells. I think this hurts Hollowed One, but for what it's worth, I think this is too slow against Hollowed One. So, like, it's not impactful enough, I think, against things like Tron, and it's too slow against something like Hollowed One, unless, of course, they are too slow themselves. And you might be saying, 2 mana too slow. Yeah, Hollowed One can do stupid things on turn 1, and you need to be playing this before they do their stupid things. So, unfortunately, I don't think this is going to see a ton of play in Modern. Legacy, maybe? I don't know enough about the Legacy metagame, but I do know some people have been talking about putting this in Esper Stoneblade. So Stoneblade, you know, this might have a home in there. As for Standard, I don't see this seeing pretty much any play in Standard, because it very specifically looks to be a card targeted towards the Modern metagame. Now, the card that I'm probably most excited about at this current juncture is easily Bedevil. This card, I just love spicy, spicy removal. This hits artifact, creature, and planeswalker. Only thing it doesn't hit is enchantments. And sure, there is a, the control deck that runs a lot of those enchantments. Really annoying. Who cares? You blow up their Teferi. Gotcha. And if they don't have the Teferi, you can blow up an artifact that someone has. You can blow up whatever. So I see this helping Grixis control a lot. It's going to be difficult, I think, to justify playing Niv and this together. So I think you're going to kind of see two split versions of Grixis. One that is a little bit more blue heavy, and then one that's a little bit more black heavy. So I think you're going to see that type of split. Additionally, this does help something like Mardu. I don't know if there will be a Mardu control deck, but I think this is honestly a decent card for a Mardu mid-range deck that's just looking to play a lot of really efficient creatures and make use of really efficient spells. And I think this card is incredibly efficient. 3 mana, be able to destroy almost anything that you really could care about. I think this is very helpful. And Seb MacKinnon did an amazing job on this art. I love this little demon right here with the 5 horns. Probably my favorite. It's just a great card all around. I think everything about it is great, including the flavor text. Rafter Demon is limited fodder. That's not to say it's a bad card. It's just it's good. It's best in limited. You're not going to see this card played in modern. For what it's worth, it is a demon, so it does work with Liliana's Contract. So we might maybe make another version of Liliana's Contract on Arena at some point. But this does bring us to our second mechanic, which is Spectacle. So whenever you can cast the spell for its spectacle cost rather than its mana cost if an opponent lost life. Importantly, that does not change anything about the card's CMC. So even if your opponent lost life and you do cast it for a spectacle cost, it still has 4 CMC. Additionally, this spectacle cost can be more or less than what the CMC is. You can have an advantage for having the spectacle cost paid. So this is a really interesting effect. I think it's really cool. It's kind of like Bloodthirst, hilariously, which was Gruul's old mechanic, and Gruul's getting something that's similar to Unleash, which is really cool how they kind of swap places. But it's with Rafter Demon specifically, you get to pay 1 more and have them discard, which is nice and could be helpful in limited. But the fact that it's a 4/2 makes me think that this card is probably not going to be very highly picked. Rixmati Reveler, on the other hand, I think is one of those spectacle cards that could see play not only in Standard, but I think this maybe could see play in Modern. Maybe. Don't get out your pitchforks just yet. I don't know. But at the very least, if you have no cards in hand, because of how this is worded, discard a card, then draw a card. It does not say, then if you did, draw a card. There's no intervening if clause, which means that if you have an empty hand and you cast this card, well, obviously the Reveler's in the hand, but ignore that. Then you cast this card, you'll have no cards to discard, but you still get to draw, which is very nice. Now, if your opponent has lost life, and then you play this card for spectacle cost, and you have no hand, you're drawing 3 cards for essentially free, right? This card just comes with value stapled onto it. Now, the reason I say I don't know if this is going to see play in Standard is because Risk Factor and Experimental Frenzy are both incredibly strong cards already. I don't know if you're going to want to be playing what is otherwise a 2-mana 2/2. Right, when there are so many other more aggressive cards, I don't know if this is going to be worth it because those cards are better. Not saying that this card is bad, I think this card is actually incredibly strong, but I don't think that it overshines Risk Factor decks and Experimental Frenzy decks. So time will tell. I think that Risk Factor definitely goes more into burn strategies, and Experimental Frenzy, other than being relegated to the sideboard, goes into super weenie strategies. Maybe you could see these run together. But potentially you'll see a deck that is a little bit more creature focused without any of the burn really, and just trying to spam creatures that also doesn't want to be using Experimental Frenzy. I don't know. But as for Modern, same kind of thing goes for Modern. Maybe this sees play in some sort of Mardu aggro that might come about. And the reason I say this is because the effect is very strong when you have no cards in hand. When you have some cards in hand, it's still, you can discard mountains and things like that. So there's still reason to play this even if you do have cards. But I think it has potential. Rectifier Wheeler is another card that I think has potential. The reason for this is it just domes your opponent, if nothing else. It's 4 mana, a 4/3, which is fine. It's not a great rate, but it also does shock your opponent, which is nice. If you look at Viashino Pyromancer, right, that's a 2 mana 2/1. that shocks your opponent. This, for what it's worth, can also hit planeswalkers and your opponent, but we're going to ignore that for a second. Add 2 more power and 2 more toughness for 2 more cost. Of course, it is a more prohibitive cost. And you get the benefit of being able to hit both things. So I think this card has a lot of potential, especially in a Mardu midrange deck, an aggressive Mardu midrange deck. I think this could see play in there. Or even just a black-red one. But the fact that you can hit an opponent's creature and their face, I think, is what makes this card really decent. I'm also glad that they're continuing on the 4 mana cost creature cycle that they had from Guilds of Ravnica. And I believe this is the last card for the Rakdos that we've seen so far. Also a spectacle. As you can see, this cost is less. The other ones were more. So this one, you can exile the top 2 cards of your library, then until your next turn, you can play those cards. Very important, this says until the end of your next turn. I think that's relatively new for this type of effect, this type of pseudo draw where you have like additional stuff. And the thing to note is that these cards are exiled, right? So this can play alongside Experimental Frenzy. The fact that it exiles and therefore can play alongside Experimental Frenzy, I think means that this card is going to see play. The problem becomes you need to balance the amount of threats you have and the amount of card draw you have, which is mind-boggling to think about. Red having too much card draw, right? Having too much value, because even if you have to cast this as a 3 mana card, you have an entire turn cycle to be able to utilize those cards. And I think because of that, this is going to be. I really think that this is going to see play. I hope I'm not wrong. Actually, that's not true. I hope I am wrong, because I don't want to be seeing a bunch of super fast, efficient aggro decks. That said, I think is a really interesting card, and I look forward to seeing some people play with this card. I think Standard is going to be in for a bit of a treat in the variety that we're going to see. Now we get to the Gruul mechanic, which is Riot. This creature enters the battlefield with your choice of a 1/1 counter or haste. Another, I think between Addendum and Riot, I think these are so far my 2 favorite mechanics from the set because of the choices that are involved. Right, with Addendum, you have to decide: do I play this now to get extra value, or do I wait to do it at a potentially more optimized time in terms of not giving your opponent information about what your plan is? And then with this, it's: do I get a benefit now, or do I make my creature larger for later on in the game? Right, and I think it might seem like a really insignificant choice, but knowing when to give a creature +1/+1 or knowing when to give it haste, I think is going to be very skill testing in Standard. I don't think this card potentially is going to see a lot of play in Standard. I think this card's going to be insane and limited because of the fact it's a mana sink. It can potentially come down with haste, or it's just a 4 mana 4/4 trample, which is like good. So I don't think it's going to be Standard playable. But I do see this being really nice and limited, and I do think that this mechanic is really awesome, especially when you put it on something like Gruul Spellbreaker. This card's real good. She does not look happy. 3 mana for a 3/3 trample. As long as it's your turn, you, the player, and Gruul Spellbreaker have hexproof. That alone is a good enough card. Then you put Riot onto it. This card is either a 3 mana 4/4 trampler, where on your turn it cannot die, so your opponent is going to have to be playing things on their turn to kill it, and you can't be Settle the Wreckaged because you will have hexproof. People who are playing Control are going to be playing Detection Towers, main deck, for sure, because of the power of this card, right? The card's good. I mean, there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. This is either a 3 mana 4/4 triple and hexproof, or a 3 mana 3/3 haste triple with hexproof. I think this card is going to be very defining of the Gruul Rage Riot decks. Do I think this will see play in Modern? No, Modern right now I think is like just too fast for this to see play, which is strange to think about because I think this card's incredibly strong. But you have stuff like Pelt Collector, right? So Pelt Collector into a good 2-drop into this is going to be a really nice curve, I think. I think Pelt Collector gets a lot better because we're going to see Simic caring about 1/1 counters. We see Gruul Spellbreaker caring about 1/1 counters. So I think definitely we're going to be looking at if nothing else, red-green aggressive strategies. Potentially, we'll be seeing Jund aggressive strategies and Temur aggressive strategies. And I think really they settle around Pelt Collector and Gruul Spellbreaker. I think those are going to be a nice core to aggressive decks. Onward and upward, in my opinion, to the luxurious Orzhov and their Afterlife mechanic. Now, this might seem like a super boring mechanic. I don't mind this nearly as much as I mind the Adapt mechanic, which we will get to in due time. But, you know, people dislike it because it is kind of just a Doom Traveler effect where you get a spirit creature token flying based on the number of Afterlife. So if this was Afterlife 3, then you would get 3 1/1s. That's fine. I'm fine with that. I think this specific card, not very strong. It's decent and limited because it's two bodies for 1, which is always nice, especially when 1 is a flyer. But the reason I like this Orzhov mechanic is because it is flavorful. You know, the Orzhov is all about like undeath and stuff. And it's effective, right? Your creatures are going to be incredibly sticky, so they're going to be really annoying for your opponents to deal with. You know, this is potentially going to be a really fun thing for me to add to my Abzan midrange decks, where your opponents are just really annoying for your opponent to play. And hopefully, what I'm hoping is that there will be a mono black free sack outlet, so that we can actually have a Jund and an Abzan Aristocrats deck. I'm really hopeful that that's going to be a thing, but I'm not necessarily holding my breath. Moving on to a better card for Orzhov, I believe, is Tithe Taker. Now, Tithe Taker is kind of a hate bear, whereas during your turn, your opponents are going to be a little bit more annoyed by playing spells. Very similar to Thalia, however, not nearly as strong because it is only during your turn. For what it's worth, it does hit all spells, including creature spells, and it does hit activated abilities, but Thalia, in general, is a little bit better. That said, do I think this will see play in Modern? Potentially. That's a very, very light potentially, because it is still a 2/1, and it does only work during your turn. That said, I'm absolutely going to be playing standard Death and Taxes. There's this, Baird, Kinjali Sunwing, Tocatli's Honor Guard, a lot of interesting, annoying creatures, so I'm definitely going to give standard Death and Taxes a try once this set comes out. Not really a ton to talk about with this card, unfortunately. Lot to talk about with this card, though. Mortify is coming back. Destroy target creature or enchantment, similar to the Rakdos card, which is over here. Similar to that, except for the fact that this doesn't cost as much to cast. And why do I say that? A generic mana is a lot easier to cast, even if you're just playing 2 colors, right? This will be a lot easier to cast in a black-white deck than Bedevil will be in a just red-black deck, because of the fact that you only need 1 of each of the colors, as opposed to two of one and 1 of the other. But for that trade-off, we don't get to kill a Planeswalker. That said, this card is awesome. It's going to help keep Esper control, competing with Grixis. Not that it necessarily needed it, but this is another card for Abzan if you want to be playing Abzan control, which I think is reasonable with Vraska and things like that. This might see play in Abzan midrange, but I'm not entirely sure. Mardu might double up and play Mortifies and Bedevils, but I'm not entirely sure if they're going to do that, just because I do think that Bedevil is a little bit better, but if the mana doesn't shake out perfectly, then people might have more Mortifies, maybe a 2-2 split of Mortify and Bedevil. But I really love efficient removal, and this is absolutely efficient. We're gonna start here with the Simic, because I'm gonna save the ranting for a little bit. Incubation incongruity. I can speak words. Split cards back. This is fine. It's weird that Incubation, I guess it makes sense. Incubation can't get lands, but I don't know when you're gonna want to play this, like, ever, because of the fact that you have to hit a creature or you get like nothing out of the spell. But incongruity is kind of the reason you might look at this. It does exile the creature, which is really interesting, because it does permanently deal with Phoenixes and Phoenixes, both Rekindling and Arclight, but they do have a frog. It is instant, which is nice, which means you can potentially deal with the frog on your turn, but it's not like you're getting full 1-for-1 value. Because of the fact that it gives them a creature, I assume that this is not going to see play as removal. I think there's enough splashable removal. For example, if you're playing Teamer, you can just play red. If you're playing Sultai, you have the black removal. If you're playing Bant, you have the white removal. I think that it's just not worth necessarily playing this card. If you're playing just Simic, maybe you play this because it is efficient, effective removal. But I think it is just going to be a little bit not good enough because they do still have a body. On to the Simic. They have +1/+1 counters again. Now, usually, this wouldn't be annoying, right? I'm fine with +1/+1 counters. The problem I have personally is that with almost all of the guilds that I can think of off the top of my dome, the mechanics were different, right? Rakdos, they went from Hellbent, which cared about having no cards in hand, to Unleash, which cared about like choosing not to block in order to get more power, and now caring about hitting your opponent. Right. Dimir, even though Dimir doesn't necessarily have great mechanics, right? Transmute tutored things. Cypher tried to give you additional value from your creatures and from attacking with your spells and stuff. And then Surveil, which is just like one of the best freaking blue-black mechanics there is. Simic has been +1/+1 counters every single time. All 3 times they've been +1/+1 counters, and that's what bothers me the most. Is that this could have been any other mechanic and been better, really. Like, I'm not disappointed that it's +1/+1 counters. I'm disappointed that it's +1/+1 counters for the 3rd time. I understand that this is kind of a fixed monstrous where you can utilize the counters from the creatures and readapt again. That's cool, but Simic is about putting things together, is about mashing weird creatures. This is a mutant, a homunculus mutant. It has like weird human hands, weird like froggy feet stuff. It's strange. It's a weird creature, and it's shoving a bunch of stuff together. They could have done something else, and I'm just so incredibly disappointed that it's +1/+1 counters for the 3rd time. It's probably going to be a fine mechanic. This card is fine and limited. A 3-mana 2/3 flyer is great. The fact that you can make it a 3/4 flyer is fantastic. If you can remove the counters from it and then make it big again, that's really awesome. But it's just so frustrating to see Urza went from Haunt to Extort to Afterlife, all 3 of them still flavorfully aligned to the Orzhov Guild, but mechanically distinct, right? And that's my biggest problem, is that flavorfully and mechanically, this is just like the same as all of like the other mechanics. Graft, I mean, Evolve was fine. I thought Evolve was interesting. Graft, I thought was interesting. Adapt seems fine, like in a vacuum. The problem with Adapt is not in a vacuum. The problem with Adapt is looking at the past that they've done and knowing that it's just been +1/+1 counters every time, and it makes me sad. Now Sakana, as you can see here, Sakana, she does not look happy. Also notice, it does not say Prime Speaker anymore. She's now Utopian Speaker. She is no longer the leader of the Simic. That goes to what looks to be a human elf. If you have not seen the Mothership video, you can check that out. She has her trident now. But she does get value when you have a creature with a +1/+1 counter already. She is a 4-mana 4/4, which is fine. She has a large Adapt, which turns her into an 8/8, which is good. And she gives herself Trample, which is fine. I don't know how a Merfolk Wizard gives all your creatures Trample with Adapt, but whatever. I think that she is a fine card. I think that this cost on Adapt is fine. My problem with Adapt, as I said, is that it's just frustrating. Growth Spiral. This card, once again, Seb MacKinnon. Amazing, amazing art. This is a great way to do like modern contemporary Magic art and still make it feel magical. I have no problem with a lot of the contemporary Magic art. I know a lot of people do. I don't have a problem with the like conglomeration, making everything seem more coherent. But I do love to see these standout pieces every now and then. I do prefer a cohesive world, but my God, Seb did a fantastic job on this card. And speaking of the card, it's really good. Instant speed, draw a card. You may put a land from your hand at the bottom. It cantrips, which is fine. But maybe you see this in Bant Ramp. You could potentially see this in Bant Control, because if you leave up a counter spell and your opponent just doesn't have anything that you want to cast, that you want to counter, then you can Growth Spiral end of turn. I think this is a really, really cool, fun, normal card. It's pauper legal as well, which is fair. Some people, I should note, have been talking about adding this card to prime time thing in Modern. I've forgotten the name of the deck, which is awkward. Amulet Titan, there we go. But I don't play the deck. After talking with a friend of mine who does play the deck, he does seem to think that this is probably not going to be good enough in that specific deck, but, you know, that's fine. I think that's whatevs. And last, Simic Ascendancy. Put a counter on a creature you control. Whenever one or more counters are put on a creature you control, put that many growth counters on this. At the beginning of your upkeep, if this has 20 more growth counters, you win the game. This has no protection, which means this card is not going to see play. It might see play in EDH, where you could burst things a little bit better. For example, in Atraxa, whenever you proliferate a counter on one of your creatures, it also gives you a counter on Simic Ascendancy, which is really cool. So if you have one creature with a +1/+1 counter and Simic Ascendancy with a +1 or with a growth counter, and then you proliferate at the end of your turn, you put one counter on your creature, so it's a creature with two +1/+1 counters. You put a counter on Simic Ascendancy, so it has two growth counters, and then Simic Ascendancy triggers from the +1/+1 counter that you put on your creature, putting it up to 3 growth counters. So that's interesting. That's something that you can do. It is a nice mana sink for limited, so probably is going to be fine and limited for the fact, like, for this part alone, like, ignore everything else. But because it doesn't have innate protection from, like, anything, this means that this card is just not going to see play, especially with Mortify running around. So this took me a lot longer than I expected. My apologies. Thank you to everyone who decided to stick around and listen to me rant. I'm probably going to continue doing this, but I'm going to wait. I'll probably do like a week chunk at a time instead of making a bunch of really small videos, just because these videos can often disrupt the views of, like, the average thing that I put out. So this is also, you're going to notice, be put out at a really weird time, and that's just so it doesn't impact my my, like, actual viewers. So I hope you guys don't mind, but I do want to thank my lovely patrons, especially Salamander and Zerar, for their continued support. If you'd like to join them and support the channel, you'll find links to that in the description down below, as well as links to my Discord, where we talk about all things Magic, including spoilers. Yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, go and tap that like button, add a subscription to your mana pool, and cast a comment in the comment section down below. And until next time, I will be one.